let's go to our topic of the day. Political atmosphere in Indonesia has begun to heat up as political parties are consolidating their strength to support their presidential candidates. Although the elections are expected to run smoothly like in the past, many investors are still in a wait-and-see mode to open a new business.
Indonesia's general election are scheduled to be held in February 2024 to elect a new president, vice president, members of legislative bodies including the House of Representatives or DPR, the House of Regional Representatives or DPD, and the Regional Legislative Councils or DPRD. The presidential election is expected to grab the most interest as the three presidential candidates, Prabowo Subianto, the current Minister of Defense and Chairman of the Great Indonesia Movement Party or Gerindra, Ganjar Pranowo, the former Governor of Central Java, and Anies Baswedan, the former Governor of Jakarta, will compete to replace President Joko Widodo, who is in his final term in office. In the midst of the dynamic political landscape during the election preparation period, it is a good time to assess the challenges and opportunities for the economy ahead and after the election. Historically, the previous elections helped boost the economic growth, thanks to the large spending for election campaigns. But some people are worried that the rising political temperature ahead of the elections could trigger political instability. This could disrupt business and investment in the country. Considering the change of the country leadership can present uncertain conduction for investors should take several measures before making any investment decision during the election period. The current administration has successfully maintained the country's economic resilience and recovery after suffering a sharp downturn due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which reached its peak in Indonesia in mid-2021. This commendable effort is reflected in the resounding GDP growth rate of 5.17% achieved in the second quarter of 2023, which is quite an achievement against the backdrop of the global economic slowdown. However, the main question remains, what is the future direction of the Indonesian economy in the hands of the next government? How do we navigate the economy through the increasingly complex global challenges? Are we still heading toward faster and sustainable growth for Indonesia to achieve its vision for 2045? According to some economic analysts, the upcoming election will affect new investment because investors will generally wait and see the outcome of the new president. However, the election will not have an impact on the investments that are already underway, as can be seen in the latest investment data released by the Ministry of Investment and the Investment Coordinating Board, or BKPM. Based on this data, the total investment realization reached 678.7 trillion rupiah, or about $44 billion during the first semester of 2023. Or an increase of 16.1% on an annual basis. The investment realization during the first semester accounted for 48.5% of the investment target of 1,400 trillion rupiah set by the government in 2023. Investment during the first semester was still dominated by foreign investment, which reached 363.3 trillion rupiah, or 53.5% of total investment realization. Meanwhile, the domestic investment amounted 315.4 trillion rupiah, or 46.3%. Indonesia's economy expanded 5.17% in the April-June quarter from the same period a year earlier, outpacing the 4.93% growth predicted by most economists. The first quarter growth was revised up slightly to 5.04%. All economic indicators showed an improvement in the first semester of this year, even though the political temperature had started to heat up. Major political parties have begun to show their strength to support their presidential and vice presidential candidates. Therefore, we hope that the upcoming elections will run smoothly and produce leaders who are smart and wise and have the capacity to lead this great country.
Indonesia will hold presidential and legislative elections simultaneously in February next year. The presidential election has attracted most attention because, as we know, the elected leader will play a crucial role in determining the direction of the country's economic policy for the next 5 years. Here, our guest this afternoon through Zoom, Ibu Shinta Kamdani, the new elected chairwoman of Indonesian Employers Association, or APINDO. Ibu Shinta will share her insights on the implication of the presidential election on business as well as investment. Hello, Ibu Shinta. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
Thank you, Ibu Shinta, for joining us here on Economic Outlook. Ibu Shinta, although it is a bit late, we would also like to congratulate you for being appointed as the chairperson of the Indonesian Employers Association, or APINDO, Ibu Shinta. Now, could you please share with us, firstly, what are your main priorities as a chairwoman of APINDO for the next 5 years term?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity. The vision of APINDO this moment is to really be able to have conducive business climate, competitive and sustainable, in order to be able to create jobs. So this is really the vision of APINDO. And as you know, as the employers organization, APINDO has been very much focusing on the manpower and labor issues. However, now, in order to achieve the vision, we have 4 missions in APINDO. So first, the enhancement of employment climate, when we aim to increase the active contribution of APINDO in shaping the highly competitive Indonesian labor market. But second, also, we are focusing on MSMEs. So not just the big businesses, but also the MSME in shaping really to strengthen APINDO's entrepreneurs community based on mutual cooperation for sustainable business growth. So I think the focus of MSME as the 97% of Indonesia economy is very important. And we want to empower more of the MSME. And the third is investment. In order to achieve the vision in creating jobs, we need to also drive investment. And when we talk about investment here, it's not just the existing investors in order for them to be able to prove on doing business in Indonesia, but also getting new investors. So I think both domestic and foreign investors, this is something that APINDO is very much focusing as one of our mission as well. And the last one is the fourth one is policy advocacy, aim to really advocate and represent the business community, the entrepreneurs. As we know, on the policy that government issues, we are also giving inputs and advocacy. So this is something that we are also doing. So now APINDO has 4 missions. And of course, this is something that we are going in the next 5 years. We have also priority programs. And the priority program includes first on the economic roadmap that APINDO is currently preparing on sectoral and cross-sectoral issues that will be given to the candidates of the leadership candidates of the president and vice president candidates. And hopefully our inputs will be adopted in their economic program. And the second is stunting. This is an issue that APINDO is very much putting as a priority, because human capital development is a big issue, and we believe with the 68% of Indonesian is malnutrition. We need to focus on the issue of stunting in really supporting the government to reduce stunting in Indonesia. And the third is also, we're talking about small, medium enterprises. APINDO has specific program called the UMKM Merdeka, in which we also work together with academy, universities, small, medium enterprises, and the big businesses. And
Alright.
I think many of the priority programs are really in the next 5 years is really to, again, support the vision and mission of APINDO.
Thank you so much for sharing your visions as well as your missions for the next 5 years of APINDO. Now, Ibu Shinta, let's talk about the upcoming election. Businesses nationwide are currently watching the potential implication of Indonesia's president's elections that is coming in February next year. Do you think the much anticipated event will affect business activities in the country, and how much will it affect the economy here in Indonesia?
Yes, political leadership transition in Indonesia always matters for business and potential investor, as all of these two basics tend to be jeopardized in political or presidential transition, either by civil unrest, violent, youth partisan political campaign process, populist regulation, for example, that are issued without proper consultation process and end up burdening businesses in the midst of the transition. We talk, for example, I can mention the halal law that was issued in the middle of the dormancy of the government. And this really has impacted businesses. So definitely it matters. Moreover, there's also too much room for political discretion in Indonesia. So much so that our regulation system does not work to or implement well as intended on paper, unless the political leadership really pays close attention to its execution. Thus, businesses cannot rely too much on existing system or business climate during such political transition. Unlike in economies that have more well-established investment grade. So I think yes, it matters, and this is why I think we have been really mentioning this to our government, that the political stability also in the transition is very, very important.
Of course. Now, as reported in some medias in the country, that some foreign investors actually prefer to wait for the outcome of the upcoming 2024 elections before investing in Indonesia. Do you think such a wait and see attitude like this is a normal business strategy, or do you think this is actually a reflection of their concern about the potential political instability?
I think it is understandable. I think obviously when there is changes in the government leaders, the president election, usually investor has a tendency to wait and see and choose to hold back on investment, especially on the long-term investment until the new regime is in place. But I think we also need to see that that actually with the wait and see attitude in the form of business concern over potential short-term disruption or overhaul on the business climate in Indonesia does not necessarily mean that investors expect that there will be a political chaos. This is just a tendency that happen in all parts of the world. And I think we can also see that Indonesia actually has done pretty well if we look at the past two elections in which violent and political unrest are much lower than perhaps 20 years ago. In fact, the probability of political instability in the next election may actually be quite low. Business is very much confident in the business climate and stability during the election year. And as we see, the existing government under the Jokowi's leadership is better compared to many others before on the lens of economic recovery and inflation control. So I think this is giving a very positive signal. And of course, drive his political succession to somehow preserve his leadership and legacy. Thus, both factors are important to measure the effectiveness of the economic agenda.
All right, so that's good to know for now, Ibu Shinta. Now, unlike the previous two presidential elections in 2014 as well as in 2019, the upcoming Indonesian presidential election will have three potential candidates, Prabowo Subianto, Ganjar Pranowo, as well as Anies Baswedan. From the APINDO side, Ibu Shinta, what are APINDO's criteria for the next Indonesian president?
I think as a stakeholder to a democratic country like Indonesia, we want the president who is first committed to openness and listening to all Indonesian economic stakeholder, including also domestic, foreign. Simply because Indonesia economy cannot grow exponentially in a relatively short term period, let's say the next 10 years, without the support or cooperation with from other countries and without benchmarking our economic competitiveness and productivity against our peer group countries like ASEAN 5 or even the BRICS. Thus, our future president should be open to listen to them and leverage such foreign relation to uplift our economic growth. The second is prudent and rational in decision making. I think we mean to say that the Indonesian president should not make decisions just because of his political party. So, on one aspect of his political party. Or if the public popular opinion swing to a certain idea, he or she should carefully consider all aspects before making a decision. I think Indonesia challenges holistically internal and external economic stakeholder across sectors, also businesses across scale, people as the market, worker, and as business carefully consider the fact that we need to be faithful to the nation's economic growth aspiration and what we logically need to do to get there. So I think this is a very, very important element. The third is exercise good governance and efficient bureaucracy. I think from business point of view, this also will be the most crucial because 80% of Indonesia business or investment climate problems do not come from a bad law, but from poor governance, poor execution, and inefficient bureaucracy. So Indonesia barely performs any economic impact assessment or review to recalibrate existing regulations. So we've been telling the government we need to do a regulatory impact assessment before policy are being issued. And obviously, we need consistency and systematic public-private consultation mechanism. And we tend to undermine this regulatory transparency and good public communication. Also, on the third aspect is practical. I think we want a president that's result-oriented, should be a person who holds every government apparatus, including himself, his political backers, and those working around him to be accountable when designing and executing national program or budget in which they also spend to achieve a certain development. So I think the KPIs are very, very important. Corruption, I think, should be completely eradicated to give ways to an equitable, professional, and efficient bureaucracy, and every law should be implemented and enforced as intended. So I think we need this also is very important. I think in the next 10 years, Indonesia has little to no room of failures. If we want to achieve the Indonesia Maju 2045, we only have 10 years left in order for us to come out from the middle income trap.
Exactly.
So professionalism, I think to get the job done is very, very crucial.
Especially to expedite Indonesia's growth to reach that 2045 golden year. Now, last question. Indonesia still relies on foreign investment at the moment to boost the economic growth. Do you think the new president still needs to attract foreign investors? Because some analysts actually believe that foreign investors still do so little to solve the country's high unemployment. What's your opinion on this?
Yeah, I think there are a good number of reasons why foreign investment will always matter for Indonesia economic growth. I think first, FDI is one of Indonesia's main source of foreign currency reserves. It's the second biggest source after trade in goods or commodities. I think without ample reserve, Indonesia will be in huge financial disaster when external shock like currency weakening, global slowdown, pandemic happens. Second, I think FDI also dominates Indonesia investment, as we see on the second quarter 2023. BKPM reported that 53.3% of Indonesian investment are from FDI. This means without continuous flow of FDI, Indonesia investment growth will be a stall, stagnant, or in contraction. The third is investment is the second biggest economic growth driver in Indonesia after the domestic consumption, making about 25 to 30% of Indonesia GDP growth per annum. This means they create significant jobs and tax revenue for Indonesia. Also, Indonesia has a huge financing gap. In 2021, MSME financing gap is estimated at about 1,500 trillion rupiah, and Indonesia will require about 1.04 trillion or 25 billion US dollar of financing per annum for green electricity transition, for example. So this amount of financing is impossible to be created domestically, and we have not even talked about other infrastructure and programs. So the global FDI is an immense source of economic financing. And I think we can see that even with the global growth slowdown, global FDI is still reported for about 1.3 trillion US dollar in 2022. So, even developed countries like US, Canada, Japan, they need also, the major sources of global FDI still have the need to attract FDI to their countries. And I think FDI also brings a lot of advantage, including the job creations. I think one area we need to see that we need many new technology. Indonesia has to be integrated in the global value chain and create more decent jobs. And I think we need to move from the informal to the formal sector. So many of this, I think, will have to be driven by investment. Thus, the assumption that FDI does not create many jobs is not true. We are moving from the labor intensive for Indonesia. We're moving from labor intensive to capital intensive. So we are not creating as many jobs as before, because this is now as a capital incentive. Of course, with technology automation will be less job creation. But I think what is important to be noticing that besides FDI, we also try to now create more partnership and collaboration with local domestic players. So not just bringing FDI in, but how can FDI can partner also with some of the domestic players. So this is a model right now that we are very much supporting.
That's a great point right there to end our dialogue today. Thank you so much, Ibu Shinta Widjaja Kamdani, the chairwoman of APINDO, for your thoughts as well as your insights on behalf of APINDO. And thank you for being here on Economic Outlook today. Thank you.
Thank you.